All right. Yes. So localization at Wolt is the name of the presentation. I know that's a very vague and an open term. When we use the word localization, probably all kinds of concepts come into your heads. Today we're going to dive into some of them. I see localization as a very big and broad topic, something I'm actually very interested in. But yeah, actually, let me also set my timer here just so I know I'm not going way over time. Let's continue to the first slide, which is a little bit about myself. So my name is Kristian. I am originally from the Faroe Islands, which anybody here know where that is? Okay, maybe 20%, my gut level estimate. I've been living in Helsinki for 6 years and I'm working at Wolt for 5 of those years in different teams and domains. Working first on the Wolt partner app, which is written in React Native. Actually, I joined with knowing no React Native, and now I know a bit of React Native. I've also worked on Wolt.com and our internal tooling that Nilo was talking about earlier. I also used to be front-end competence lead. So yeah, which Richard has the honor of having that job. Now I'm in the so-called ad tech team. We build surfaces for companies to be able to advertise their businesses on our platform. Also, I am the winner of the one and only Noisy Typer Award of Wolt 2019. If anybody wants to talk about mechanical keyboards with me, I'm happy to do that afterwards. Let's continue. So I know you already know some things about Wolt. I have some more facts about Wolt that are related to localization. So firstly, just a little bit about Wolt, even though 92% of you already have used it. Our mission is quite simple. We want to make cities better for a whole bunch of people. That's not just customers, also merchants, couriers, actually quite many others as well. Let's continue though. We're not just in Finland. We are actually in more than 25 countries. Most of them are highlighted here. Yeah, a whole bunch of people use Wolt from very different backgrounds and different languages, different things that they expect. What we really care about, as Nilo was talking about, is amazing user experience. That's not just for our main consumer app, it's also for our, anything else that users use, such as the Wolt partner app and Wolt merchant app. All of these apps have exact same rating on the App Store and Google Play, 4.8 and 4.6 respectively, which we are very proud about. Especially for me, I'm very proud about Wolt partner, which yeah, I was working on for 3 years. Also, we support 29 different languages. If you use Wolt.com or iPhone, you can go to settings, play around, see how it looks. But yeah, it's interestingly enough, once we've grown, we found out that supporting different languages is more challenging than it sounds initially. But anyway, let's talk about the question of what localization is in the first place. And by the way, I would have expected to see what's my next slide, so maybe I'll mess it up a little bit. But I came up with a definition myself. Well, not myself. I kind of maybe got inspiration from different sources, but this is how I see it. It's the practice of adapting a product to meet the needs of the market. We want to make it such that the product feels like it was made specifically for that culture. Probably most of you live in Finland, so here the app was like literally made for Finland. But we want to make it feel like it was made for wherever you are, and even whichever language you speak in that country. So before jumping to that iceberg that you saw, I want to throw out actually to the audience here. So I was saying localization means many different things. I would like to ask anybody here, what is something that comes to your mind when I say localization? Yes. Translations, yes. I guess that's probably the most obvious one that everybody thought about when you heard the title. We want to translate the languages, the words that you see on the screen. Anything else, though? Is there something else? Cultural differences. That's a really important one. Yes. Right to left. Yeah, that's the one we didn't think about in the beginning. Date formatting. Yeah. Currencies.
Name bad product name, but sound very bad in different languages.
Product name. That's a good. Yeah, for sure. Exactly, for sure. Time zones. Oh, yeah, we all love those. Sorting order. Yes. I didn't think about that, but that's a very good one. And maybe one or two more if somebody has some thoughts. Pluralization, yes, that is something I'm going to be talking about a little bit. There was something about categories, but yeah, there's a whole bunch of different things. And I actually tried to put some of those things myself. So language, numbers, layout, direction, those were all mentioned. I tried to think about a whole bunch of other things. I'm just going to read them out. Names, phone numbers, cultural differences, first day of the week, the support, the language that our support associates speak, different regulations, money, taxes, local language variations, time zones, addresses, SEO, the length of words in general, the logo of the company. Thank you for that one. Vertical layout, which is the bottom of the iceberg, something we don't support, but technically exists in Japanese. But today we're going to jump into some of them. But before that, I would like to kind of just highlight why this is important. So, as Nilo said, we want to go the extra mile. We want to do what feels right for the customer. We want to do what feels right for us, something we're proud of. We want to delight users. We want to positively surprise them, no matter where they are and no matter who they are. That, like many of you probably are using the app in English here in Finland, and hopefully it works just fine. At least it does for me. And that's the experience we want for everyone. Let's dive into a few cases. So you guys already mentioned some of them, and sorry for using that word, you folks. Translating messages, that's the most obvious one. I just wanted to quickly dive a little bit into our translation flow. So I made this chart just before this. I thought it would be a good idea, so it might not be totally accurate, but pretty much here. We have a first step actually, which is that the designer gives us a design which has certain words in it. After that, the developer puts a message and some context into our cloud-based translation tool. It's called Phrase. Probably some of you are using it, some might be using something else. Then the translators, they take their time to add the translation in their local language. And this is kind of what they see. So they see a whole bunch of details, including a description and screenshot. We try to make it as obvious as possible. What is the thing that you're actually translating? Then that gets synced to the language.json file in the app, and that gets then shown in the translated app. So now let's jump into the kind of message translation itself. I looked through some of the Wolt repos myself. Let me quickly open this so I see the timer again. I looked into some of the Wolt repos. I think the most common solution we use for translation in React is called React Intel. Anybody here who uses that library? I see a few hands. I can recommend it. It's quite nice. It has a declarative API, which is kind of on the top, where you just write as a component with a prop, the ID. It also has the imperative API, which kind of allows you to kind of call format message. The end result is pretty much the same. It kind of just what you prefer and what's the kind of use case in that particular where you need it. So I'm going to be using React Intel, but we won't really be diving that much into code anyway, or at all. Hopefully those subsequent presentations will be more interesting for those of you who want technical stuff. It supports some advanced functionality like pluralization, the select operator, date and time, number formatting. I just wanted to quickly look at plural and select because they are surprisingly more interesting than you would think, especially plural, which is right here. And sorry if somebody speaks Ukrainian and this is wrong, that's my bad. But I tried to get somebody to verify this for me. So we have plurals, but did you know that there's actually 6 different ways to pluralize. So those of you who only speak English, you are used to two ways. So there's one. So for example, you're at one meetup, and there's anything else, any other number, which is you're at some number of meetups. In this case, it would be formatted like this. So you have task count, for example, and then you say plural, and then you say the different cases, one, and then it's like the number of pending task, because that's only going to be one, and then anything else pending task. So kind of straightforward. Then you have some languages that have way more cases. For example, in Ukrainian, you have 4 different cases. You have one, few, many, and other. And then you can actually make translation for all of those. Yeah, again, sorry if this is not totally right, but the concept at least is correct. There are 6 different cases. And I just wanted to quickly look at, I just quickly wanted to jump out of present mode and look at this really useful document here. This is a part of Unicode. It's called like plural rules. This is how you can how you know what these concepts mean. So one is basically these numbers here, for example, 1, 21, 31, and so forth. Then you have few, which is these numbers, many, other, yeah. Arabic has 6 cases, which also supports 2 and 0. But yeah, it's pretty interesting stuff. Then we have select, which is simpler, but still. And I use ChatGPT to come up with this example. We don't really use select that much, but you can do it. So you can pass the parameter to your message. For example, in this case, it's subscription status. And then depending on the status, it gives you a different message. And then I had ChatGPT translated version in Finnish because I don't speak Finnish. But I just wanted to say that these select and plural cases might not always be needed. So I came up with kind of a arbitrary example that I could think about. I know this is quite reductive, but I thought it maybe fits the point kind of nicely. So Finnish doesn't have grammatical gender, but some other languages like English does. So here you can, for example, say he uses or she uses or they use Wolt in English, which has this like complicated markdown structure, but in Finnish you can just say, hopefully this is correct Finnish, hän käytä Woltia, which is the nice thing is this can all be controlled by the translator, just whatever they need. Somebody also mentioned layout direction. So this is something that's actually important at Wolt, and as I mentioned, this is something we didn't think about in the beginning, which is interestingly meant that we had to do some kind of a refactor once we actually expanded to countries that have languages that are going from right to left, such as Israel, which has Hebrew, which of course is the main language, and Arabic, both going from right to left. So here I have a screenshot of the Wolt app, which is kind of one in English and the other one in Arabic. And then I mentioned kind of a fun fact, which is that Japanese can be written vertically. There is a CSS rule that supports this. So you can actually implement support for vertical text in your web app. I doubt that you will need to, but you can. Let's continue. So somebody also mentioned currencies, and I think this is another excellent point. And they are kind of, for example, rendered differently in different languages. So for example, Danish crowns in English is written as just DKK. But in Danish, it would be written as KR dot. So it's also important to know what's the language of the reader when you're rendering these currencies. Also, some currencies don't have cents. So this also was one of these things that we didn't really think about until we had to do a whole bunch of refactoring. So we like to just multiply numbers by 100 and assume that 1 is 1 cent, which worked perfectly fine until we expanded to Japan and then Iceland, where 1 is actually indivisible. So we had to make special cases for those two currencies. And yeah, so nowadays we have our whole system is able to support currencies where 1 is the lowest, but yeah, it couldn't always do that. So if you're working on an app that you're planning on expanding to those countries, then keep that in mind. There's also local language variation. So you know this from English. In the US, you often have words that have S in them. Like, for example, pluralization. That's set. And in the UK English, it would be pluralization with a S. We also have some, in English, we just support the US version of English in Wolt, but we do have some languages where we support different variations of the same language. For example, I don't know if this is the right word, but Common German, the German that they speak in Germany, and then also Austrian German, which has some words that are spelled differently or are different. But basically, it's like 95% the same, or some percentage the same. We also have Common Arabic and Israeli Arabic, which are also different. So how we solve this is by maintaining kind of an override file that where if there is a match for a specific key in that country variant of the language, then we use that one. Otherwise, we use the default one for the language. For example, for the Austrian one, it would be called DEMAT.json. AT stands for Austria. Now, moving on, somebody mentioned cultural differences. I'm really proud of you, whoever said that. This is definitely something that we don't really think about that much. Most of us, at least I don't. I want to speak on behalf of all of you. But in Wolt, we really have to think about this. And I want to dive a little bit into some cases from Japan, where it turned out that like we were used to expanding to other countries, like to kind of countries that are quite similar as Finland. For example, Sweden and Denmark and, North European countries where there's, of course, differences, but maybe not fundamental differences. In Japan, there's maybe some kind of bigger differences. I would love to point out maybe the kind of address picker. And I wish I had actually a demo of this, but I didn't quite have time to prepare it. But pretty much when you put in an address in an app in Finland, you normally start by typing the street number. The street name. In Japan, you actually don't do that. You start by typing the postcode, which is maybe something that I think developers in Finland wouldn't think about. But this is what the users in Japan expect. This is the kind of behavior that they expect. So we had to make kind of a custom address picking flow if the user is in Japan. And then there's this kind of general expectation that these kind of Wolt-like apps, these kind of marketplaces, they should have a lot of stuff. They should have many options. And I think a lot of Japanese customers, they felt like Wolt feels too limited. You just have these simple lists of a few restaurants, for example, and then it just ends. So we kind of implemented some different kind of way to show content in Japan, where we, for example, have endless scrolls. You can just keep scrolling. We keep showing you new content. And lastly, and maybe most interestingly, is expectation that brands should have a mascot. Maybe many of you are aware of this, but yeah, in Japan, it's pretty common that brands have a mascot. It's not always the case. For example, most car brands don't have a Japanese mascot, but it is often the case. And we took this as a really nice opportunity to make our own mascot, which you see here on this picture, and you see it all around. It's called Juho, which is kind of a blend of some Finnish stuff and some Japanese stuff. It's this little reindeer. It's pretty cute. I think this is maybe one example where kind of making changes to fit kind of a cultural expectations, I think actually improved our brand as a whole. So it's actually not just extra work. It actually benefits our existing foundation. I just wanted to point out some other cases that are probably less significant, but maybe worth kind of to point out. The length of words. Look at the two sentences up there, where one of them is courier partner in English, and the other one is the same meaning in Georgian. You can see that the Georgian version is almost twice as long. So maybe some of the assumptions that you made about how wide your element is going to be before the text overflows, they will probably be wrong if you translate your app to Georgian. In general, sorry, yes? Sorry? Yeah, German is also a really good example. I think both are fine. I mean, yeah, exactly. In German, you tend to have very long words, which kind of maybe have the same meaning as multiple words in other languages. So there's also like you have to consider how to split the word correctly. I didn't really think about that when making the presentation, but good point. Also about dates, most countries have different standards about that. Won't dive into it, but I'm sure you all know about that. And then regulations. Some countries, of course, have different rules about how we are allowed to communicate with users and process their data. I wanted to show a fun example from Georgia, where here was some point about the logo or the name. Well, we do have a Georgian name. Maybe many of you can't see it because I just realized that maybe it's on the bottom of the slide here, but if you can't, then stand up. It's pretty interesting to see. But yeah, we are required to have a logo in Georgian, and I think it looks pretty cool. So that was some of the kind of dives into some kind of cases that I think are interesting related to localization. It's definitely not extensive, and even my iceberg there was definitely not extensive either. I just wanted to quickly dive into some tips and tricks, because this is not just showing the cool stuff we're working with. Hopefully there's some stuff you can take away here as well. I just want to be clear that this is my personal opinions based on working with kind of highly locale sensitive apps for a few years. Probably there's going to be some disagreement. If there is, let's have a chat. I would love to hear your opinions. Also, they range from simple stuff that you can implement, tomorrow, to very fundamental stuff that, affects how your company approaches, hiring. So, take everything with a grain of salt and kind of the implementation effort as well. First of all, try to optimize the translation pipeline where you can. So I showed you kind of a chart of how we do translations. It has many different steps, many different people involved. We want to reduce the chance of anyone making a mistake. So firstly, you can actually add TypeScript support for your messages and your parameters. I won't dive into how here, but you can do it. There are libraries for this, and you can also hack it together, like I did in Wolt.com. Also, use human translators. So I know it's very tempting these days to use ChatGPT or some other tool. I think they're not quite good enough yet. I'm not saying you shouldn't use them, but I think there should always be a person who really understands the language and the culture to kind of validate that this is actually the correct message to show. We also want to make the translation as easy as possible. So many people who are translating, at least at Wolt, they have other jobs. They often work in marketing or something else. We want to make the whole flow as easy as possible for them. So earlier I showed you descriptions and screenshots in our translation tool. Also, it's really important to educate them about the whole flow and the tools. What I showed you earlier with pluralization and select the advanced features. It's important that everyone understands kind of the tools that they have at their disposal. And then add tests where you can. For example, the parameters meaning the dynamic stuff that you pass to a message, it should match mostly for all languages. I just showed an example earlier where it didn't match, where you might want to know the gender of some user in English, but probably you don't care about it in Finnish. But as a general rule, the parameters should be the same. So this is definitely something you can test. And don't put any countries, make sure there's no country-specific information in the translation. One example I saw once was, I think a Hungarian translation or something, where the English one, contact our support if you have some problem. And then I noticed that one of the translation had an email address in it, which was localized, specific to that country. So of course that would lead to confusion if a user was using the language of that country in another country. So the email address wouldn't really apply in that case. So this is probably something you can attest for. Let's continue. Now we're getting maybe to the more controversial stuff. I was looking over Wolt repos. I think it's kind of mixed. I recommend using a flat JSON structure in your en.json. I have the flat one and the nested one side by side. Maybe I'll ask the room, why do I think that?
Translation software.
Translation software. Yeah, that's my opinion. Yeah, it's easier to just copy paste profile.header.title, control C, and just control F through the code base. That's just my opinion. I've sometimes found it a bit tedious to work with code bases that have nested structures. But yeah, definitely I'm definitely not too passionate about this one. Sorry? Version control, I think flat is kind of nicer, but this is just my opinion. Definitely, I'm hearing a lot of opinion here. Let's talk about it after. Name props with localization in mind. What do I mean by this? I was going to ask the audience here, but since I'm short on time, maybe I'll just go over it. So instead of saying, for example, left content and right content in your props, you might consider that the direction will not always be left to right. So the most significant part might be on the right. So in this case, I would rather call prop 1 something like main content or something like that. And then maybe prop 2 can be trailing content. So the trailing signifies the position that it's kind of after. And that's kind of ignoring where after actually is. And don't hard code strings. So here I had an example. I made a very last minute change to this example when I found out we had hot dogs and not pizza. But anyway, it probably still applies. My opinion is that if you have any intention of ever localizing your app, even if it's only in one language right now, don't put your strings in the code. Don't put your strings in the JSX. It's going to be really hard to go over all of those thousands of lines, tens of thousands of lines later, and I guarantee you will make mistakes. You're going to have mixed languages. It's a lot easier to just export them. The simplest possible example, not something I've ever done, but I think I would still prefer, is just to have have some messages.ts or something where you can just import the text, and then later, once you actually need localization, you can add some library there instead. In that case, TypeScript will do all the hard work for you of telling you exactly where you need to make sure that this text is properly localized. Maybe I think there's only one more slide, so kind of nicely timed, and probably this is the most important one if I'm correct here. Yes. So I think I've been talking a lot about code bases and localization and all of these things. I think the most important thing really is to have a diverse team, to have people from different backgrounds, different cultures, different experiences, people who look at the world in different ways than you do. It can really make you much more educated decisions about your code. It can make it can also much reduce the chance that you're making some mistake, that you're making some assumption that doesn't actually apply to everyone. I also realize that probably most of the people in this room are not in positions where you can make decision about kind of your hiring pipeline. But even if you're not, I would say advocate for it. I think most companies in Finland can probably benefit from a little bit more diversity. And I just mean diversity, any sort of diversity. It doesn't yeah. But yeah, that was pretty much it for my part. I just wanted to recap at the end that we do have some open jobs. We have a job for a senior front-end engineer in compliance, which is in the fintech group. They work with money. It's very localization related. We are also looking for a couple of interns. If you're looking for internship, then now is the time to apply for that. Also, if you are interested in working in Wolt in general or working with me, then feel free to have a chat afterwards, and I'd love to get in touch. And that is actually it for my part. I have some useful links here at the end. One of them is a blog I wrote about how to add support for TypeScript support in internationalization. The document I looked for pluralization rules is very useful. And the Intel API in your browser, I wanted to talk about it, but I felt like I didn't quite have time, but something I recommend getting familiar with. But yeah, that's actually it for me. Thank you all for listening. I really appreciate it.